Greetings, one and all, from the Holy Land, the Holy Apple, the Holy Hilltop, Tal Binyamin. We are on Super Mondays here on the 21st of Tammuz, 5783. Our class, second part, Meet the New Old Jewish Anti-Semites, a crash course on this topic, folks. Okay, we're going to go on. We began speaking last week. We spoke about the enemy within. It begins with Esav, Jacob's brother. It continues with Esav, Jacob's brother's angel, spiritual mentor. It continues with the selling of Joseph. It continues with Moses being turned over to the Egyptian government officials by a Jew that he saved. It continues with the fact that Moses brings in a new group within the Jewish people called the Erev Rav, the multitudes of nations that he converted without consulting God, and they join in this bloodbath, so to speak, against the Jewish people, against the Torah, against commandments, against the righteous Jews. Okay, so now we continue. The enemy within. JC, he had 12 disciples. It wasn't by chance, haphazardly, that he had 12 disciples. His idea was to erase the 12 tribes. He was the replacement theory. He would have 12 disciples who would replace the 12 tribes, just like Christianity comes to, God forbid, replace the Judaism, Jewish religion. So it's amazing. All of them were Jews. All of them were religious, observed many, many commandments. The enemy within. How many millions? Who even knows the numbers? How many millions of Jews have been exterminated by the Christians? Disciples, 12 disciples, all being Jewish, all abiding by a lot of the Torah, abiding by the commandments, some of them. You know, I remember when I was a kid, teenager, there was a great song, Love So Right, Turned Out to Be So Wrong. So you have like Jews that on the outside they look like they're religious Jews. They dress like they're religious Jews. Today it's not hard to imagine. There are people out there that come all over the world. They will dress in a black hat, and many times they have side curls and beards. They look like they're religious Jews, but they're really Christian missionaries. So it's not hard to imagine this. So once again, the enemy within. Jewish anti-Semites. Jewish self-haters. This group, they looked so Jewish. Sometimes people use that derogatory. I'm not. They looked so Jewish. I'm not talking about their nose. That the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, there was a need by the assembly, the Great Assembly, to create a new prayer that would separate true Jews to these Christians who, once again, looked Jewish. And they observed many commandments. So our sages in the time of Rabbi Gamliel in Yavne, assisted by Shmuel HaKatan, who was a fourth generation Amora, enacted a additional blessing in the 18 blessings of the Amidah, where we stand, the silent meditation prayer. This prayer was constituted against these Jewish Christians, the enemy within. We were asking, we were pleading to God to uproot them, to destroy them, to separate them from us. This blessing, the 19th blessing, what you have in your prayer books, most of you out there listening right now, is not the real deal. It's been censored over centuries. It's been censored, the prayer. Ever since printing press was invented, if I'm not mistaken, in 1399, something like that. So we're talking about good 600 years since the printing presses and prayer books, Jewish books, could be now dispersed in mass. This prayer was a cause of Christian blood libels throughout the generations. And especially under the auspices of Jewish Hellenists. Jewish traders that went over to the other side, that became baptized, became Christians, and began the fight against Judaism, against Torah, against commandments. Just like that movement of Christianity was begun by Jews, religious Jews from within, the enemy. So too, the instigators of blood libels against this prayer were mostly Jews. Let's look at a few examples. A man named Domenico, he commanded the printing presses, all the printing presses, to check all prayer books and punish the Jews if this prayer was found, the 19th prayer against Christians. Against Jews that had converted to Christianity. Take two. Another instigator against this prayer in 1717 was a Jewish boy named originally Mordechai, who baptized himself to become the notorious Jew-hater Philip Ernesti Christoffels. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Originally, the young boy, Mordechai, was sent by his father, Rabbi Moshe Shmaya, to learn Torah in Peorda. Shortly afterwards, Mordechai's father passed away, and Mordechai was raised by his uncle. His uncle sent him away to the best yeshiva, best learning school at the time. The Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the seminary, was the famous Jewish law expert, the Eshel Avram. This Mordechai became a teacher in various cities, coming back eventually to his hometown of Peorda. During this time, he became mentally unstable and began to change and become the charlatan of the town. The Jewish community tried to assist Mordechai to get him back on the right path and to assist him also with his mental health, but to no avail, no avail. Later he was put by the Jewish community into excommunication. Mordechai, to get revenge against the Jews, began connecting with various Christian groups and eventually was baptized. Mordechai, or Philip Arensty Christofels, became the leading figure to arrest Jews and to sentence them, to have them sentenced to death for saying and printing the prayer against Jews that became Christians. Next, another prayer, the Aleinu L'Shabeach prayer, at the end of our prayer book. This was also a delicacy for Jewish anti-Semites, Jews that had converted to Christianity, the enemy within, to attack Jews throughout the world. The Aleinu L'Shabeach prayer, the leaders of incitement against Jews who recited these prayers, who printed these prayers, were all Jewish heretics who converted to Christianity. Let's give a few examples. In 1336, Alfonso from Spain led the charge to forbid this prayer in synagogues. Jewish heretic. 1370, a gigantic demonstration was organized by Jewish heretics against this prayer. 1394, Peter, aka Pesach, led the charge against this prayer, bringing many Jews to trial, to prison, and to death. August 22nd, 1400, 77 Jews were killed for the crime of reciting this prayer, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Another instigator was Antiochus Margarita. Police and soldiers were stationed in shuls. Jews were forced to say the Aleinu L'Shabeach out loud. In most prayer books today, the paragraph which is talking about Islam and is talking about Christianity has been removed in most prayer books. In the land of Israel, we've come back with those lines. But if you've ever been in a synagogue, you might have wondered why most of the prayers are said silently, or to people to themselves, maybe the first line or the last line read. But why is the Aleinu L'Shabeach, why is it sung together? You know why? Because it became law in many European countries that the Jews had to say it out loud to make sure that they were not adding this one line against the Christians. So therefore, till this day, you can go to a modern Orthodox synagogue or a conservative reform, they'll sing the Aleinu L'Shabeach out loud. Because it was a decree by the police and the government to make sure that Jews were not saying this line. Okay, moving right along. The closing of the famous, it's called the Mothers of all the Yeshivot, the famous Volozhin Yeshiva, Who instigated about the close by the Russian authorities? Who instigated that? Of course, Jewish heretics. The enemy from within. Here's a summary of events. In 1858, students from the yeshiva who were from the maskilim, the assimilated camp, informed on the yeshiva to the government. Jews who are learning at the institution, religious institution, go to the government to inform on them. In 1859, once again, there were informers against the yeshiva, the Volozhin yeshiva. In 1885, a man, a heretic named Micha Yosef, author of a magazine called HaShachar, he wrote various articles in his magazine how the slandering the yeshiva, that they are not complying with the rules that the government required to put in all types of secular studies. This is all from within. These are Jewish anti-Semites, Jewish heretics, Jewish self-haters, coming to destroy a Jewish institution, the biggest one. There were 400 students. Today it might not be a big number. Many yeshivot institutions have much larger. But in those days, it was the biggest yeshiva. And in 1892, the government of Russia closed down the yeshiva for not complying with the government requirements. After World War I, in 1918 to 1930, in Russia, to encourage communism amongst the population, there was a Jewish division of the Communist Party that was established called, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Yehudah. This was a group started, let me read you, hold on to this, you can't make up this kind of stuff, folks. There was a Jew, his name originally was Shimon Daiminstein. He was born in 1886 to a traditional Jewish family, religious Jewish family. He learned in a religious school as a child, then went on to the famous Telz Yeshiva. After Telz, he continued to the famous Slobodka Yeshiva. There he received ordination, rabbinical ordination, from none other than the leader, one of the leading rabbis of the generation at that time. In the late 1800s, Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudensky, Zecher Tzadik, Kadosh Livracha. At the age of 17, he received ordination, rabbinical ordination. A year later, at the age of 18, he went off the path, off the Jewish religious path, and he joined the Bolshevik Party. In 1918, after the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, he was author of a newspaper, get this, ironically, called The Truth. Lenin put this Jewish heretic, who changed his name, of course, from Shimon to Semyon. He was placed in charge of the Yehudah by none other than Lenin. Now, get this. This group, from 1918 to 1930, they did more damage, spiritual damage, in 12 years than 200 years of emancipation, of enlightenment. More damage. Why? Because they're Jews. We talked about there is no other force that could bring destruction upon the Jewish people more than the Jewish people. As is a slogan in the world, you are your worst enemy. This Yevsetskia group, they closed down the synagogues, turned them into nightclubs. They closed down temples. They closed down Jewish schools. They closed down Jewish ritual baths. They would have parades eating ham, going down the streets. It was forbidden to learn Hebrew. The newspaper, the famous or infamous newspaper, Pravda, wrote, "We are so jealous," listen to this, inscribe it on your hearts. "We are so jealous of the Jewish communists who break into synagogues on Jewish holidays, like Yom Kippur." Imagine that, breaking into holidays. Jews are sneaking, trying to pray, and these Jewish communists go and break into there. We wish we could have the same vigor with Russian communists against their churches. We found, we found a friend in Ben. Yeah, we have friends over here. The enemy within, the Yevsetskia. The list goes on, unfortunately, and on. We have, in Germany, we had, of course, the Kapos, who collaborated with the Nazis. Jewish Kapos collaborating with the Nazis. We have, in 1944 to 1945, we have the season, hunting season, where Jews in Israel turned over Jewish underground members of Etzel, of Lehi, to the British authorities for 1 year, 13 months. They themselves, Jews who later on became politicians. One, Teddy Kollek, was the mayor of Jerusalem for a few decades. They were in charge of torturing and turning over Jews to the British authorities. That was the big season. There was also the little season in 1947. The punishments and the severeness was less than the big season. But once again, these are Jews collaborating with the British mandate. And they themselves, not only do they turn over Jews to the enemy, but they themselves torture Jews. They themselves made sure that none of the family members would receive any jobs. They themselves made sure that their kids were thrown out of schools. Jewish anti-Semites, nothing new here. The Altalena ship, bringing Jewish a few months after the establishment of the State of Israel. The Altalena ship was sunk by Jews. 33 members on that Altalena ship were murdered. By who? By the IDF, the new IDF, and the government. If you think it's over, and you think what we see today in Israel and all over the world, so many organizations all over the world that are trying, Jews, trying the J Streets, and the list goes on, trying to destroy Judaism, Torah, commandments, separation between Jews and the nations, our worst enemies. In the Zohar Kadosh, we are told an amazing idea. That in the end of days, when the nations of the world will come to attack the Jewish people and the Messiah, they will be joined by Jews, Jewish heretics, Jewish anti-Semites, Jewish self-haters. They will be joined. Folks, if this is not prophetic, Zohar Kadosh, I don't know what is. But we see that. We see that all the time. Who are these people? Folks, who are these? Today in our times, I'm asking, these Israeli anti-Semites, these Jewish anti-Semites, self-haters, who are they really? There are a few possibilities. I don't have my prophetic hat on, so I'm giving you a few possibilities that we have in our sources. Number one, a first possibility is they are really Erev Rav. They are descendants of the nations, the multitude of nations that was accepted by Moses when we came out of Egypt. They are still around. There are dozens and dozens of pages in the secret Jewish writings, in the Zohar Kadosh, that it is in black and white, that these people, these multitudes of nations, they're the leaders of the Jewish people in the end of days. They are the leaders. If you remember, class before, we spoke about how at the time in Egypt, many statesmen, diplomats, leaders were converted by Moses. So it's not a surprise that they continue to be politicians, leaders, etc. So, as we said, these Erev Rav, these nations, are much worse than the nations of the world, and they are the reasons why the exile is continuing. Now, they are either Erev Rav themselves, they are descendants of these multitude nations, or they've been influenced. That's a second possibility. They have been influenced by the multitudes. Once again, they are not descendants, they are really Jewish. However, they have been influenced by the multitudes of the nations, and therefore they join forces with them. Okay, this is, you could look this up, this being influenced. This is written in Likutei HaGra, the gathering of the Gra, Rabbi Eliyahu, from Vilna's writings, in Even Shlema, chapter 11. He talks about there is a large group of Jews that learn from the Erev Rav and become similar to them. They're not the real McCoy, but they are similar. Now, there's an amazing concept that these people were born Jews. They're really Jews. However, they have lost their Jewish soul and therefore become like the nations of the world, and they become enemies to, have become self-haters, Jewish anti-Semites, Israeli anti-Semites, the worst kind. How's that possible? This idea is brought down by two tremendous Torah giants. One is the Rashba. In his question and answer, question number 414, he brings this down, an amazing concept, that there are times when God switches a soul of a Jew to the soul of a non-Jew. Amazing. The Rashba. Next, in an ancient Secrets of Torah book, a Kabbalah book, written by Rabbi Natan Shapira. Don't be confused by, in the first class we talked about Rabbi Natan Shapira. Not to be confused, though they lived in the same generation. Rabbi Natan Shapira was around in the 1662 in the land of Israel. He has a book out, it's called Matzat Shimurim, and he talks about there that if a person has relations with Gentiles, now these are not just physical relations with Gentiles, but also connecting up relations. They have many dealings with Gentiles. And such people can find themselves going to sleep at night with their Jewish soul and then being taken and removed, and thus they no longer have their Jewish soul. Can they retrieve it back? Yes. If they repent, they could get their Jewish soul back. But they are no longer with the Jewish soul. They are no longer with the divine image that a Jew has, only a Jew has. The Tselem Elokim. So, believe it or not, this idea by the Rashba of a person being 100% Jewish and then becoming a Gentile. Once again, on the outside you cannot tell. You ask them, they'll tell you they're Jewish. You cannot tell. There's not something, they don't have a sign on their forehead, you know, we're really Gentiles. But their inside, their actions, their deeds, their speech, hate speech in this case, is all Gentile. They have lost their Jewish soul. Amazing. This is brought down in Jewish law. By who? By the Magen Avraham. In Orach Chaim, Jewish law, chapter 46, law 10. Or Shulchan Aruch Harav, chapter 46, law 4. Last but not least, so once again, this is brought down. That is why we say the prayer every day. Thank you, God, for not making me a Gentile. Why don't we just say that once in a lifetime and that's enough? Why do we have to say it every single day? Why do we have to say it every day? Because it's not a carte blanche. It's not a pass. It can change. It can change. Amazing. If you're still sitting there, you really didn't chop it. You really didn't get it. Finally, in the famous Igeret Teiman, the Maimonides writes that those, if you ever see people that do not believe in God or His prophecies, no, they did not stand on Mount Sinai. Once again, a Jew could be a transgressor. He could have 1,000,000 transgressions, but he still believes in God. That is not who we're talking about. We're talking about people, atheists, people who do not believe in God. Those people, the Maimonides says, straight out, black and white, those people did not stand on Mount Sinai. Just like the multitudes of nations, the Erev Rav, they did not stand on Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. So that would explain this phenomena of Jewish anti-Semites, Jewish self-haters, Jewish heretics. I have to finish off with one of the most amazing things I've seen in my entire life. And I just saw it. Remember this. Copy it, find it in the book, the famous Jewish book, Sefer Hasidim by Rav Yehudah Hasid, in paragraph, chapter 209. Okay, I remember it always, Resh Tet, rat. Okay, we have amongst us a lot of rats, Jewish rats. Listen to what he says, and then we will say goodbye. If you see a house that was once a house of a righteous Jew, or it was a synagogue, and you see that now there are wicked people there, or wicked Jews living there, know that it's only because Jews in that synagogue, the original synagogue, did not treat the synagogue with due respect. Once again, the source of our downfall, what gives the nations of the world or the wicked power, is ourselves, is our evil doing. Next. He goes on to say, if you see that there is a Jewish learning institution that has been destroyed, know that it was Jews from the inside that did not treat the institution, the learning institution, with proper respect and derech eretz. And he finishes it off by saying, Le'olam, there is no situation in the world that a Gentile or nations can do anything derogatory, anything evil to the Jewish people, unless the Jewish people are evil to other Jews. Folks, do you understand what we just said here? There is no possibility, there is no possibility in the world that any Gentile, private person, any nation can do damage, to annihilate, to destroy, to inflict suffering to the Jewish people, unless within the Jewish people there are Jews that are inflicting, that are nasty to other Jews. Think about what we're going through. Think about, we spoke about in the first class, 29 Jews murdered in the last 6 months. 29 Jews murdered. How do the Gentiles receive this power to annihilate us? To bring upon the Jewish people massacres. You know how they do it? It's connected. It's connected to the last months and years and decades and centuries and millennias of Jews within, self-haters, anti-Semites, who come, they hate themselves, they hate Judaism, they hate Torah, they hate religious, they hate the religious people. They are the ones that give power to our enemies to destroy us. So if we ever want to put our finger, point a finger at somebody responsible for what we see in the world, specifically in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, we no longer have to look further than ourselves. The enemy within, the Jewish anti-Semites. And that is what we're seeing. And that is why the security in the land of Israel is in tipsy-turvy. We're in such a terrible predicament from east, west, north, south. Our security situation is awful. Why? Because we have within us Jews that hate other Jews, Jews that hate themselves, and Jews that fight against all commandments, anything that has any aroma of Judaism. Today we see the enemy within to fight, and they give the green light. They give power to the nations of the world to finish the job, to destroy us, God forbid. Remember always these lessons, these last two lessons, the enemy within.